Sherry Elliott learned on her wedding day that love was not included in the marriage contract, only servitude, silence, and survival. The Sipes mansion stood like a monument to wealth and power, its marble floors gleaming, its crystal chandeliers casting fractured light across rooms too large to feel like home. Sherry had walked through those massive doors as a bride, her heart full of hope and dreams, believing that Kevin Sipes loved her enough to build a life together. She learned the truth before the sun set on her wedding night. "You'll sleep in the guest room on the 3rd floor," Kelly Sipes had announced, her voice cold and final as winter. "My son needs his rest, and you need to understand your place in this household before you share his bed." Sherry had looked to Kevin, waiting for him to object, to defend her, to claim his bride. But Kevin had simply nodded, his eyes downcast, and mumbled, "Yes, mother, whatever you think is best." That was the moment Sherry's dreams began to die. The days that followed revealed the true nature of her new life. Kelly Sipes ruled the mansion with absolute authority, and Kevin was nothing more than her obedient puppet. Every decision, every word, every action required his mother's approval. He worked in the family company, a position his mother had secured for him, and came home each evening to report to her like a child seeking praise. And Sherry, she was the help. "The floors need scrubbing," Kelly would say each morning, standing over Sherry with cold eyes. "A proper wife keeps a clean house. Or didn't they teach you that in whatever slum you came from?" Sherry had come from a modest neighborhood, yes. Her parents had passed when she was young, leaving her to work her way through life with dignity and kindness. She'd met Kevin at a charity event where she'd been volunteering, and he'd seemed different then, kind, attentive, interested in her thoughts and dreams, but that Kevin had disappeared the moment they'd signed the marriage certificate. This Kevin barely looked at her. This Kevin watched in silence while his mother heaped humiliation upon humiliation on his wife. Clean the bathrooms, all 6 of them. Polish the silver. Prepare dinner for 8. Mother is having guests. And make sure you're presentable, though I doubt that's possible. Sherry cleaned. She cooked. She served Kelly's friends their elaborate meals while they spoke about her as if she weren't in the room. I don't know what Kevin was thinking. Marrying her. Charity case, I heard. Kelly's trying to make the best of it. Such a shame. The Sipes family deserves better. Kelly would smile, playing the martyr. We all make sacrifices for our children's happiness. But there was no happiness in the Sipes mansion. Only cold marble, colder hearts, and a woman slowly breaking under the weight of loveless cruelty. At night, alone in her 3rd-floor room, Sherry would cry into her pillow. She'd married for love, but love had never entered this house. She dreamed of a partner, but Kevin was no partner. He was his mother's son and nothing more. She tried to reach him. God, how she tried. "Kevin, please, can we talk? Just the 2 of us?" "Mother says we can talk at dinner with the family." "Kevin, I thought we could take a walk together, like we used to." "Mother needs me to review some documents with her." "Kevin, I'm your wife. Don't I matter to you at all?" And that was when he'd finally looked at her, really looked at her, and said words that cut deeper than any of Kelly's insults. "You matter when Mother says you matter. Until then, just do what you're told, and stop making problems." Sherry stopped trying after that. She performed her duties, kept her head down, and tried to survive each day. The mansion was a prison dressed in luxury, and she was serving a sentence with no end in sight. Months passed in miserable routine. Wake before dawn, clean the house. Prepare breakfast, endure Kelly's criticisms. Prepare lunch, clean more. Prepare dinner, serve, clean again. Collapse into bed exhausted, only to repeat it all the next day. Then everything changed. Sherry missed her cycle, then another. Her body felt different, tender, exhausted in a new way. She bought a test in secret, her hands shaking as she waited for the result. Pregnant. She was carrying Kevin's child. For the first time in months, Sherry felt a flicker of hope. A baby might change things. A baby might make Kevin see her as more than his mother's servant. A baby might give her a purpose, a reason to endure, someone to love who might love her back. She told Kevin first, catching him alone one evening before Kelly could intervene. "I'm pregnant," she said softly, her hand on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Kevin's face had gone pale, then flushed. Does mother know? Not joy, not excitement, not even concern for Sherry's health, just fear of what his mother would say. "I wanted to tell you first," Sherry said, her hope already withering. "I thought you'd be happy. We need to tell mother immediately." Kevin stood and Sherry saw his hands trembling. She'll know what to do. They found Kelly in the sitting room, and Kevin delivered the news like a student reporting a bad grade. Kelly's reaction was immediate and terrifying. Her eyes went cold, calculating, and something darker flickered across her face, something that made Sherry's blood run cold. "Pregnant," Kelly repeated, her voice flat. "How convenient." "Convenient?" Sherry's voice shook. "This is your grandchild." "If it is." Kelly stood, circling Sherry like a predator. "We'll need to verify everything, of course. Make sure this child is actually a Sipes." "Mother, what are you saying?" Even Kevin looked shocked. "I'm saying your wife spent a lot of time alone before she trapped you into marriage. Who knows what she was doing, who she was seeing?" Kelly's smile was poisonous. "We'll get tests done. Make sure this baby is legitimate." "How dare you?" Sherry started, but Kelly cut her off. "How dare I? How dare you come into this house, live off our charity, and now claim to be carrying our heir?" Kelly's voice rose. "You'll do exactly as I say when I say it. And if this child is Kevin's, we'll decide what happens next." "Not you." Sherry's hand went protectively to her stomach. "What do you mean, decide what happens?" But Kelly had already turned away, dismissing her. That night, alone in her room, Sherry heard voices drifting up from below. Kelly and Kevin talking in harsh whispers. She crept to the top of the stairs and listened, her heart pounding. "If it's a boy, we'll take the child and send her away," Kelly was saying. "A male heir belongs to the Sipes family, not some poor girl from nowhere who wormed her way into our lives." "Mother, we can't just take her baby. We can do whatever we want. This is our house, our family, our legacy. She's nothing, but what if it's a girl?" Kelly's laugh was cruel. "Then we'll make sure she regrets ever stepping foot in this house. No daughter from her bloodline will ever bear the Sipes name." Sherry fled back to her room, shaking with horror and fear. She was trapped, pregnant and trapped with people who saw her child as either property to steal or a punishment to inflict. She lay awake all night, one hand on her growing belly, whispering promises to the life inside her. "I'll protect you. Somehow I'll protect you. I won't let them hurt you." But even as she made those promises, Sherry had no idea how she would keep them. The next morning, Kelly's cruelty intensified. The cleaning duties doubled. The insults grew sharper. And Kevin, weak and spineless, watched it all happen without saying a word. Sherry endured because she had no choice. She endured because she had nowhere else to go. She endured because inside her a small life was growing, depending on her to survive. But late at night, when Kelly thought no one could hear, Sherry caught fragments of her mother-in-law's plans. Dark plans. Cruel plans. Plans that made Sherry understand that whether she was carrying a boy or a girl, her baby's future was in terrible danger, and she was powerless to stop it. After months of humiliation, Sherry discovers she's pregnant, and Kelly's eyes flash with something darker than hatred when she hears the news. Chapter 2. The heir they never wanted. The pregnancy that should have brought joy instead brought a new level of torment that Sherry had not imagined possible. Kelly. Sipes watched her daughter-in-law's stomach swell with an intensity that bordered on obsession. But it wasn't the excited anticipation of a grandmother-to-be. It was the cold calculation of someone planning a hostile takeover. "You're getting fat," Kelly would say each morning, eyeing Sherry's growing belly with disgust. Pregnancy is no excuse for laziness. The floors still need scrubbing. Sherry, her back aching and her ankles swollen, would lower herself to her knees with a bucket and brush, cleaning the vast marble floors of the mansion while Kelly watched with satisfaction. A little manual labor might trigger an early delivery, Kelly had said once too quietly for Kevin to hear. Wouldn't that be unfortunate? The words had chilled Sherry to her core. Kevin remained blind to his mother's cruelty, or perhaps he simply chose not to see it. He'd retreated even further into Kelly's shadow, barely acknowledging Sherry's existence, except to echo whatever criticism his mother had voiced. Mother says you're not eating properly. The baby needs nutrition. Mother says you shouldn't rest so much during the day. Mother says. Sherry wanted to scream that what the baby needed was a father who cared, a grandmother who wasn't plotting against her, a home that felt safe instead of hostile. But she held her tongue, conserving her energy for the life growing inside her. The doctor's appointments were particularly painful. Kelly insisted on attending every single one, sitting in the examination room with her arms crossed and her eyes sharp, scrutinizing every word the doctor said. Dr. Graham Smith was the Sipes family physician, a man who'd served them for years. He was professional but distant, and Sherry noticed how his eyes would flick to Kelly before answering any of Sherry's questions, as if seeking approval for his responses. Everything looks healthy, he would say, but his tone was flat, perfunctory. Baby is developing normally. And the gender? Kelly would press. When can we determine the gender? It was all Kelly cared about. Not Sherry's health, not the baby's well-being, just whether the child would be male or female. At home, the whispered conversations between Kelly and Kevin grew more frequent and more disturbing. Sherry, moving quietly through the mansion on her swollen feet, heard fragments that turned her blood to ice. A male heir would secure the family legacy, Kelly said one evening, her voice carrying through the partially open study door. But that woman cannot be allowed to raise a Sipes son. She'd poison him against us, fill his head with her poverty mentality. What are you suggesting, Mother? Kevin's voice was hesitant, uncertain. I'm suggesting that if this child is a boy, we take custody. You divorce her, claim she's an unfit mother. We have the money, the lawyers, the influence. She has nothing. Who would believe her over us? And if it's a girl? The pause that followed was heavy with menace. If it's a girl, Kelly said slowly, then this child has no value to the Sipes family. We make it clear to her that she and her daughter are unwelcome. We make her life so unbearable that she leaves on her own, taking her mistake with her. Sherry had pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob, backing away from the door before they could discover her eavesdropping. She ran her hands over her stomach, feeling the baby move inside her, and whispered desperately, "Please be a boy. Please be a boy, and maybe they'll let me stay with you. Maybe if you're valuable to them, they'll let me be your mother." It was a terrible hope to pin on an unborn child, but Sherry had nothing else left. The ultrasound appointment arrived like a judgment day. Sherry lay on the examination table, the cold gel on her exposed belly, watching the screen with a mixture of hope and dread, while Kelly stood at the foot of the bed, her eyes fixed on the monitor with predatory focus. Dr. Smith moved the wand slowly, studying the images. Baby looks healthy, good heartbeat, proper development. The gender, Kelly said impatiently. Tell us the gender. Dr. Smith adjusted the wand, looked closer, then smiled in that professional way doctors have when delivering news. Congratulations, it's a girl. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sherry felt her heart plummet, even as she tried to smile, tried to feel joy at knowing she was carrying a daughter. But all she could feel was terror, because she'd seen Kelly's face change the moment those words left the doctor's mouth. A girl, Kelly repeated, her voice devoid of emotion. I see. The ride home was silent, but the silence was suffocating. Kelly stared out the window, her mind clearly working through scenarios, making plans. Kevin drove with white knuckles, shooting nervous glances at his mother. And Sherry sat in the back seat, one hand protectively over her belly, whispering silently to her daughter, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you're not what they wanted, but I want you. I love you already. We'll find a way." That night, Kelly's true nature revealed itself fully. "Pack your things," Kelly announced at dinner, looking at Sherry with cold finality. "You have until the baby is born to find somewhere else to live." "Mother," even Kevin looked shocked. "She's still my wife, a wife who's giving you a worthless daughter instead of a son." Kelly's eyes flashed. "We took her in out of charity. We gave her everything. And this is how she repays us? With a girl?" "I didn't choose the baby's gender," Sherry said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "That's not how it works. Don't you dare talk back to me." Kelly stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You have been nothing but a burden since the day you entered this house. You will leave the moment the child is born, and you will take your daughter with you. The Sipes family wants nothing to do with either of you." "Kevin, please." Sherry turned to her husband, desperation making her voice crack. "This is your daughter, our daughter. You can't just throw us out." But Kevin wouldn't meet her eyes. "Mother knows what's best for the family. I'm your family." Sherry's voice rose, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your wife. This baby is your child." "You were a mistake," Kevin said quietly, and the words shattered what little hope Sherry had left. "Mother tried to warn me, but I wouldn't listen. Now I see she was right all along." "Right about what?" Sherry demanded. "What has she been telling you?" Kelly smiled, triumphant. "The truth, that you're not good enough for this family, that you never were. That you trapped my son into marriage and now you're trying to trap him with a baby. That's insane." "I love Kevin. You love his money," Kelly interrupted. "But that's about to end. You'll get nothing in the divorce, nothing. You'll leave here with exactly what you came with, nothing." Sherry looked at Kevin one last time, searching for any sign of the man she'd married, the man who'd promised to love and cherish her. But that man was gone, if he'd ever existed at all. "You're going to regret this," Sherry said quietly, standing despite her shaking legs. "Both of you. When your daughter is born, when she's real and beautiful and innocent, you're going to regret throwing her away." "I doubt that," Kelly said coldly. "Now get out of my sight. You're upsetting my son." Sherry left the dining room, climbed the stairs to her lonely third-floor room, and wept until she had no tears left. She had a few months left until the baby was born. A few months to figure out how to survive as a single mother with no money, no family, and nowhere to go. But what Sherry didn't know was that Kelly's cruelty ran deeper than eviction. Kelly had plans, dark, devastating plans that would ensure Sherry lost everything, and those plans were already in motion. At the ultrasound appointment, the technician smiles and says, "Congratulations, it's a girl," and Sherry sees Kelly's face twist into something truly evil. Chapter 3. The Doctor's Betrayal. Dr. Graham Smith sat in his modest home office, staring at the pile of bills spread across his desk, like accusatory fingers pointing at his failures. Gambling debts. That's what had brought him to this moment of moral collapse. It had started innocently enough, a poker game with friends, small stakes, just for fun. But Graham had discovered he liked the thrill, the rush of possibility that came with each hand dealt. He'd started visiting casinos, telling his wife he was working late. The small bets became larger ones. The occasional wins encouraged him to chase bigger victories, until the victories stopped coming and only the debts remained. He owed money to people who didn't accept excuses or payment plans, people who'd made it very clear what would happen if he didn't pay up soon. His medical practice barely covered his family's expenses. The debt was crushing him, threatening to destroy everything he'd built. He was desperate, which was exactly what Kelly Sipes had been counting on. The call had come on a Tuesday evening. "Dr. Smith, this is Kelly Sipes. I need to speak with you privately tomorrow. My estate." "Come alone." Graham had felt a knot of anxiety form in his stomach. The Sipes family was wealthy and influential, his most prominent patients. He couldn't afford to offend them. So he'd gone. Kelly had received him in her private sitting room, a space dripping with old money and quiet power. She'd offered him tea, made small talk about his practice, and then, with surgical precision, cut straight to the matter at hand. "I know about your debts, Doctor." Graham's blood had run cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please, don't insult my intelligence." Kelly had smiled, but it was the smile of a snake. "You owe a significant sum to some rather unsavory individuals. You're drowning, Dr. Smith, and I'm offering you a life preserver." She'd slid an envelope across the table. Graham had opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a check for an amount that would not only clear his debts, but leave him with enough to start fresh. "What do you want?" he'd asked, because money like this always came with strings attached. "A simple lie," Kelly had said, her voice casual as if discussing the weather. "My daughter-in-law is pregnant. When she comes in for her next appointment, I need you to tell my son, privately of course, that the baby is not his." "That's insane." "I can't." "You can. And you will." Kelly's eyes had hardened. "Or I'll make sure those people you owe money to know exactly where to find you. I'll make sure the medical board hears about your gambling problem. I'll make sure you lose everything. Your practice, your license, your family." Graham had stared at the check, at the solution to all his problems, and felt his integrity crumble like sand. "Why?" he'd asked weakly. "Why do you want to destroy your son's marriage? That's not your concern. Your concern is whether you want to save yourself and your family, or whether you want to lose everything over misplaced loyalty to a woman you barely know." It wasn't even a choice, really. Graham had a wife, children who depended on him. Sherry was just a patient, someone he'd seen a few times for routine prenatal care. She'd seemed nice enough, but she wasn't his responsibility. His family was. One lie, Kelly had said softly, seeing his resistance crumbling. One sentence, and all your problems disappear. Graham had taken the check. Now, sitting in his office preparing for Sherry's next appointment, he felt sick with what he was about to do. He'd rehearsed the words, practiced the serious expression, crafted the performance of a concerned physician delivering devastating news, but he couldn't quite silence the voice in his head that whispered he was about to ruin an innocent woman's life. When Sherry arrived for her appointment, she looked tired and worried, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Kevin accompanied her, as did Kelly. All three of them crowded into the examination room. "Everything looks good," Graham said after performing the routine checks, his voice sounding hollow to his own ears. "Baby is healthy, developing well." "Excellent," Kelly said, but her eyes were on Graham, sharp and expectant. This was the moment. Graham cleared his throat. "Mr. Sipes, could I speak with you privately for a moment? There's a medical matter I need to discuss." He saw Sherry's face pale, saw fear flash in her eyes. "What medical matter?" "Is something wrong with the baby?" "The baby is fine," Graham said, and that much at least was true. "This is a different matter. Mr. Sipes, please." Kevin followed him into the hallway, and Kelly, claiming she needed to discuss something with the doctor, came too. Sherry was left alone in the examination room, her heart pounding with dread. In the hallway, Graham delivered his lie. "Mr. Sipes, I need to inform you of something serious." He paused, as if this was difficult for him, as if he hadn't been paid handsomely to destroy this family. "The baby your wife is carrying." "It's not yours." Kevin's face went slack with shock. "What?" "Medical tests don't lie," Graham continued, the words bitter in his mouth. There had been no tests. There was no medical evidence. Just a check in his bank account and a script written by Kelly Sipes. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but the paternity is definitely not yours." Kelly made a sound that might have been surprise, but was actually satisfaction. "Oh my God, Kevin, I knew something wasn't right." "Are you sure?" Kevin demanded, his face flushing red. "You're absolutely certain?" "Completely certain," Graham lied, meeting Kevin's eyes and seeing the trust there, the faith in his medical expertise. It made him feel even sicker, but the debt was cleared. His family was safe. That had to matter more. "Can I see the test results?" Kevin asked. Graham's heart skipped. "Patient privacy laws prevent me from sharing them without your wife's consent. But I assure you, the evidence is conclusive." It was another lie layered on top of the first. There were no test results because there had been no tests. Kelly placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "I told you, Kevin. I told you she couldn't be trusted." Kevin's face had gone from shocked to enraged. "That lying—" "Let's go home and discuss this," Kelly said smoothly, already steering her son toward the door. "Thank you, Doctor, for your honesty." Graham watched them go, heard Sherry calling after them, asking what was wrong, why they were leaving. He saw the confusion and fear on her face, and then he went into his office, closed the door, and poured himself a drink with shaking hands. He'd saved himself, but he'd destroyed Sherry Elliott. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the rationalization and the desperation and the debt that was now cleared, Graham Smith knew he'd become something he'd sworn never to be when he took his medical oath. He'd become a man who hurt people for money. Kelly Sipes had bought his soul, and he'd sold it without a fight. At the next appointment, with Kelly present and smiling wickedly, Dr. Graham Smith looks Sherry in the eyes and says, "Mr. Sipes, I need to speak with you privately. It's about the paternity of this child." Chapter 4. The Lie That Shattered Everything. The moment Kevin emerged from that private conversation with Dr. Smith, Sherry knew her life was about to shatter. His face had transformed. The man who'd barely acknowledged her existence for months now looked at her with active hatred, with disgust so profound it seemed to radiate from him in waves. "Kevin?" Sherry struggled to stand from the examination table, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. "What's wrong? What did he tell you?" Kevin's voice when he spoke was cold dead. "The baby isn't mine." The words didn't make sense. Sherry stared at him, trying to process what he'd said. "What? That's impossible. The doctor just told me. Medical tests prove it." Kevin's hands were clenched into fists. "How could you do this? How could you lie to me, trap me into marriage, and then try to pass off another man's child as mine?" "There's no other man." Sherry's voice rose in panic and disbelief. "Kevin, I've never been with anyone but you. This is your baby, your daughter. Don't lie to me anymore." Kevin shouted, his face flushing red. "The doctor has proof, scientific proof. You've been cheating on me, and now you're trying to make me raise some other man's bastard." Sherry felt the world tilting beneath her. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't possible. "What proof? Show me this proof." "Patient privacy laws," Kelly interjected smoothly, stepping between them. "The doctor can't share the detailed results without proper authorization. But he's been our family physician for years, Kevin. He has no reason to lie." "But I have every reason," Sherry demanded, looking at her mother-in-law with sudden clarity. "This is you, isn't it? You did something. You paid him to lie." Kelly's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Listen to her, Kevin. Even caught in her deception, she tries to blame others. This is what manipulation looks like." "I'm not lying." Sherry grabbed Kevin's arm, desperate to make him listen, to make him see reason. "Please, Kevin, think about this. When would I have been with another man? You know where I am every moment of every day. Your mother makes sure of that." Maybe before we married," Kevin said, pulling away from her touch as if it burned him. "Maybe you were already pregnant when you tricked me into marrying you. We've been married for nearly a full term." "The timeline doesn't even make sense." Sherry was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Kevin, please, you're being irrational." "I'm being irrational?" Kevin's voice rose to a shout. "You're the one who's been lying this entire time. Making a fool of me, making me think I was going to be a father." "You're going to be a father?" "This is your child." But Kevin had already turned away, already chosen to believe the lie over the woman he'd married. Kelly placed a comforting hand on her son's shoulder. her face a perfect mask of sympathy, even as triumph glittered in her eyes. "We should go home, dear. You need time to process this betrayal." They left Sherry standing in the doctor's office, her world crumbling around her. She tried to speak with Dr. Smith, demanded to know what tests he'd supposedly run, but he avoided her eyes and claimed patient confidentiality prevented him from discussing details. Sherry knew then, with horrible certainty, that Kelly had gotten to him somehow. But knowing it and proving it were two different things. The ride back to the mansion was a nightmare. Kevin drove in rigid silence, while Kelly sat in the passenger seat, occasionally making cutting remarks. "I suppose we should have expected this. People like her, they see an opportunity and they take it." "Mother, please," Kevin said, but his voice was weak. "I'm just saying, we tried to give her a better life, and this is how she repays us, with deception and betrayal." Sherry sat in the back seat, one hand on her belly, and felt her daughter moving inside her. She whispered to the baby, too quietly for the others to hear, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But we're going to survive this, somehow." When they reached the mansion, everything changed. Kevin, who'd been passively cruel before, became actively hostile. He stopped speaking to Sherry entirely, except to hurl accusations. "How many men were there? Just one, or did you sleep with half the city? Whose baby is it really? Some ex-boyfriend? Someone you met at one of those charity events? Did you ever love me, or was it always about the money?" Each question was a knife twisting in Sherry's heart, because the truth, that she'd been faithful, that she'd loved him despite his weakness, that this baby was his, didn't matter anymore. He'd chosen to believe the lie. Kelly's treatment grew even worse. She piled on more chores, more humiliation, more cruelty. "Clean the garage. All of it. And don't you dare complain about being tired. This is the least you can do after what you've done to my son. Dinner was cold. Make it again. And this time try not to poison us, if that's possible for someone of your low moral character. You're getting bigger by the day. Disgusting. Try not to be seen when we have guests." Sherry endured because she had no choice. She had no money of her own. Kelly had made sure of that, claiming all household funds were managed by the family. She had no family to turn to, no friends, because Kelly had systematically isolated her from anyone she'd known before the marriage. She was trapped in a mansion that felt like a tomb, carrying a child that everyone in the house had rejected before she was even born. At night, Sherry would lie awake in her cold third-floor room and try to make plans. She'd leave after the baby was born. Somehow she'd find work. She'd build a life for herself and her daughter far away from the Sipes family. But as her due date approached and Kevin's hostility intensified, Sherry began to fear she wouldn't make it that long. He'd stopped providing for her needs. No maternity clothes, no prenatal vitamins, unless she could sneak them from the bathroom Kelly rarely used. No preparation for the baby's arrival, no crib, no clothes, nothing. "Why would I buy things for another man's child?" Kevin had snarled when she'd asked. Kelly encouraged every bit of Kevin's cruelty, fed his anger, kept the fire of his hatred burning bright. "She's probably planning to take you for everything in a divorce," Kelly would say, "making you think you're the father so she can get child support." "We should throw her out now," Kevin would respond. "Why wait?" Soon," Kelly would say, her eyes on Sherry's swollen belly. "Very soon." Sherry felt the threat hanging over her like a blade waiting to drop. She tried to stay out of their way, tried to be invisible, tried to just survive until the baby came and she could escape. But Kelly and Kevin's hatred had grown beyond reason, beyond mercy. And on a night when rain lashed the windows and thunder shook the mansion's foundations, when Sherry felt the first sharp pains of labor beginning, everything came crashing down. "Kevin," Sherry gasped, finding him in the study with his mother. "Something's wrong. The baby's coming. I need to get to the hospital." Kevin looked at her with cold, dead eyes. "That's not my problem. Please." Sherry doubled over as another contraction hit. "I'm in labor. I need help." Kelly stood, walked to where Sherry was leaning against the doorframe, and spoke words that would haunt Sherry for the rest of her life. "Get out." What? Sherry looked up, seeing no mercy in Kelly's face. Get out of this house, now! We're done supporting you and your bastard child. It's storming outside. I'm in labor! Sherry's voice rose in panic and pain. Not our concern, Kevin said, standing beside his mother, united in their cruelty. You can't do this, Sherry whispered. But she could see in their faces that they could. They would. They were doing it right now. Kelly grabbed Sherry's arm and began dragging her toward the front door. Kevin followed, his face set in grim satisfaction. No, please, please don't do this, Sherry begged, pain and terror making her voice shrill. I'll die out there. The baby will die. Should have thought of that before you decided to cheat on my son, Kelly said. Throwing open the front door, the storm roared in. Rain immediately soaking the entryway, thunder deafening. Please! Sherry clutched the door frame, but Kelly pried her fingers away. Out! And with a final shove, Kelly pushed Sherry through the door. Sherry stumbled on the front steps, her swollen belly throwing off her balance. She fell hard, landing on her hands and knees on the rain-slicked stone, crying out in pain as a contraction tore through her. Behind her, the heavy door slammed shut. Locked. Sherry pounded on the door, screaming to be let back in, but the lights inside went off one by one until the house was dark and silent. She was alone in the storm, 9 months pregnant and in labor, with nowhere to go and no one to help her. The rain soaked her within seconds, plastering her hair to her face, her nightgown to her body. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the long driveway that led to the street. Sherry knew she had to move. She couldn't stay on the steps. She had to get to the street, had to flag down a car, had to get help. She started crawling down the driveway, her hands and knees scraping on gravel. Contractions coming faster now, pain consuming her. Please, God, she whispered through the rain and tears and agony. Please save my baby. Please don't let her die because of what they've done. She made it halfway down the driveway before her strength gave out. She collapsed onto her side, curling around her belly, certain she was going to die here in the rain. But then, headlights, a car, turning onto the street, slowing as the driver saw something in the road. The car stopped. A door opened, footsteps running toward her. Please, Sherry whispered to the figure kneeling beside her in the rain. Save my baby. And a voice, kind, urgent, determined, said words that would change everything. I'm going to save both of you. One stormy night, when she was 9 months pregnant and crying in pain, he threw her out of the house. Chapter 5. Cast into the Storm. Donald Cooper had been driving home from a late meeting when the storm hit with sudden violence, turning the night sky into a roiling mass of black clouds and lightning. He'd slowed his car to navigate the rain-slicked roads when his headlights caught something in the middle of the street ahead, a dark shape that didn't belong there. His first thought was that someone had hit an animal. He pulled over, intending to move whatever it was out of the road before someone else came along and had an accident. But as he stepped out into the punishing rain, as he moved closer to the shape illuminated by his car's headlights, Donald's heart stopped. It wasn't an animal. It was a woman, a very pregnant woman. Lying in the road, soaked to the skin, crying in pain, Donald ran, his expensive shoes splashing through puddles, rain immediately drenching his suit. Ma'am? Ma'am, can you hear me? The woman looked up at him, with eyes full of such desperation and pain that Donald felt something crack in his chest. Her face was streaked with rain and tears, her lips trembling, her whole body shaking with cold and fear. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. Save my baby. Donald dropped to his knees in the puddles forming on the asphalt, rain immediately soaking through his expensive suit. He didn't care. All he cared about was the woman in front of him, who was clearly in labor and clearly in crisis. What happened? How did you get here? Donald looked around, seeing the massive Sipes mansion about 100 yards up the driveway, its windows all dark. Not a single light on, as if the house itself were dead. Did you come from that house? They threw me out, the woman gasped, another contraction making her cry out in agony. Her hand clutched her swollen belly protectively. My husband, his mother. They threw me out, into the storm. Said I was carrying a bastard. Said I deserved to die. Rage, white-hot and overwhelming, flooded through Donald. What kind of monsters threw out a pregnant woman in the middle of a storm? What kind of evil lived in that dark mansion that could do something so cruel, so heartless, so utterly devoid of humanity? But anger could wait. Right now, this woman needed help. Okay, I'm going to get you to a hospital. Can you stand? Donald slipped his arms under her, preparing to lift her. It hurts so much, she sobbed, her fingers digging into his arm. I think the baby's coming now. I fell on the steps when she pushed me. What if I hurt my baby? What if... Not in the middle of the road, she's not. Donald lifted the woman as gently as he could, shocked at how light she was, despite being 9 months pregnant. She was malnourished, he realized, with growing horror. Whoever had been caring for her, or not caring for her, had let her become dangerously thin. He could feel her ribs, see the way her collarbones jutted out sharply. This woman had been starved. He carried her to his car, using one hand to open the back door and carefully lay her across the seats. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating her face for just a moment. Young, beautiful despite the pain, and so very frightened. He shrugged off his suit jacket and covered her shaking body with it, knowing it wasn't nearly enough, but it was all he had. Hold on, he said, looking into her eyes, beautiful eyes, even swollen with tears. I'm going to get you help. What's your name? Sherry, she managed between contractions, her teeth chattering. Sherry Elliott. Sherry, I'm Donald Cooper, and I promise you, I'm not going to let anything happen to you or your baby. He said the words with absolute conviction, making a vow in that moment that he would protect this woman and her child no matter what it cost him. He ran to the driver's seat, already pulling out his phone. As he peeled out onto the street, tires spraying water, he called the nearest hospital. This is Donald Cooper. I'm bringing in a woman in active labor, possible complications, ETA 15 minutes. Have an emergency team ready. The hospital administrator didn't question him. Everyone in this part of the state knew Donald Cooper, wealthy beyond measure, generous beyond belief, and someone whose requests were treated like commands. In the back seat, Sherry was crying, one hand pressed to her stomach. I'm so scared. What if something's wrong? What if the baby's hurt from when I fell? You fell? Donald's hands tightened on the wheel. Did they push you? His mother pushed me out the door. I fell on the steps. Sherry's voice was ragged with pain and memory. They locked me out. I crawled down the driveway, and I couldn't go any further. Donald had never in his life wanted to hurt someone the way he wanted to hurt whoever had done this to Sherry. But violence could wait. Getting her to safety was all that mattered. Tell me about the baby, he said, trying to keep her conscious, keep her focused. Do you know if it's a boy or a girl? A girl, Sherry whispered. They told me it was a girl, and that's when everything got worse. They wanted a boy. They were going to take a boy from me, but a girl. They said she was worthless. The pieces of the story were coming together in Donald's mind, painting a picture so ugly he could hardly believe it. But Sherry's pain was real, her terror was real, and that mansion with all its lights off while she suffered in the rain was all too real. Your daughter isn't worthless, Donald said fiercely, and neither are you. Whatever they told you, whatever they did to you, that ends now. You're safe, Sherry. I swear to you, you're safe now. He drove through the storm like a man possessed, navigating the flooded streets with single-minded purpose. In the back seat, Sherry's contractions were getting closer together, her cries of pain more frequent. Please don't let my baby die, she begged. Please, I can handle anything else, but don't let her die. She's not going to die, Donald said, and he poured every ounce of certainty he possessed into those words. You're both going to survive this. I believe that with everything in me. The hospital appeared through the rain, like a beacon of light. Donald pulled up to the emergency entrance where a team was already waiting with a wheelchair and a gurney. Multiple contractions, Possible trauma from a fall, Donald rattled off as the medical team swarmed around the car. She's malnourished and she's been through hell. They lifted Sherry onto the gurney, and she reached out, grabbing Donald's hand with surprising strength. "Don't leave me," she said, her eyes wide with fear. "Please don't leave me alone." Something in Donald's chest, something that had been frozen since he'd lost his own wife and son, cracked open. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, squeezing her hand. "I'll be right here the whole time." The medical team wheeled her toward labor and delivery, and Donald followed, still holding her hand. His expensive clothes soaked and ruined, his shoes squelching with every step. He didn't care about the money, the clothes, the inconvenience. All he cared about was the frightened woman who'd been thrown away like trash, and the baby fighting to be born into a world that had already rejected her. The nurses tried to stop him at the labor and delivery doors. "Family only, sir?" "I'm family," Donald said in a tone that brooked no argument. "And if you try to keep me from her, I'll buy this hospital just so I can fire whoever gets in my way." The nurses looked at each other, recognized Donald Cooper, and stepped aside. Sherry was prepped for delivery, and Donald stood beside her, letting her squeeze his hand until he thought the bones might break. "You're doing great," he told her as the contractions intensified. "Just breathe. Focus on me. We're going to get through this together." "I don't even know you," Sherry gasped. "Why are you helping me?" Donald thought about his wife, about the baby boy who'd never taken a breath, about the night he'd lost them both and thought he'd never smile again. "Because someone should have been there to help me when I needed it," he said quietly. "Because you deserve kindness. Because that baby deserves a fighting chance." The doctor arrived, examined Sherry, and delivered news that made Donald's heart sink. "The baby's in distress. We need to do an emergency cesarean." Sherry started crying. "No, please, is she okay? Is my baby okay?" "We're going to make sure she's okay," the doctor said firmly. "But we need to move fast. Mr. Cooper, you'll need to wait outside." "No!" Sherry grabbed Donald's hand with both of hers. "He stays, please. I need him to stay." The doctor looked at Donald, saw something in his face and nodded. "Scrub in, quickly." Minutes later, Sherry was on the operating table, Donald beside her head, holding her hand and talking to her, keeping her calm while the surgical team worked. "Tell me about her," Donald said. "What are you going to name your daughter?" "I don't know," Sherry whispered. "I hadn't let myself think about it. I was so scared they'd take her from me." "No one's taking her from you. Not now, not ever." Donald squeezed her hand. "Think of a name. Something beautiful. Something strong." But before Sherry could answer, a cry filled the operating room, thin, angry, alive. "It's a boy," the doctor announced. "A healthy baby boy." Sherry's eyes went wide with shock. But they said, the ultrasound said, "Ultrasounds can be wrong," the doctor said, smiling. "Congratulations, you have a son." Donald felt tears streaming down his face, mixing with the rain that had soaked him earlier. A boy. Against all odds, after all the cruelty and hatred, Sherry had given birth to a boy. They cleaned the baby and brought him to Sherry's side. He was small but perfect, his tiny fists waving, his face scrunched up and red from crying. "He's beautiful," Sherry sobbed, reaching out to touch her son with shaking fingers. "He's perfect." Donald looked at the baby, this tiny miracle who'd survived his mother's ordeal, who'd chosen this stormy night to enter the world, and felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope. "What will you name him?" Donald asked softly. Sherry looked at her son, then at Donald, and fresh tears fell. "Jacob," she whispered. "It means God has been gracious because he was. He sent you to save us." The doctor spoke up then, his face serious. "Mrs. Elliot, there were some complications during delivery. We had to perform a hysterectomy to stop the bleeding. You won't be able to have more children." Sherry looked at her son, at this perfect boy in her arms, and whispered, "He's enough. He's more than enough. He's everything." Donald stayed beside her as they moved her to recovery, as nurses settled baby Jacob in a bassinet beside her bed, as the storm outside finally began to fade. He'd paid every hospital bill, made sure Sherry had the best room, the best care, everything she needed. Money was meaningless to him, but this, helping someone who truly needed it, this felt important. As dawn broke, washing pale light through the hospital window, Sherry opened her eyes and found Donald sitting in the chair beside her bed, watching over her and Jacob like a guardian angel. "You stayed," she said, her voice hoarse. "I told you I would." Sherry looked at this man, this stranger who'd saved her life, who'd held her hand through her darkest moment, who'd cried when her son was born. "Why? Why would you do all this for someone you don't know?" Donald was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with old grief. "Years ago, I lost my wife during childbirth. Our son was stillborn. I held my wife's hand as she bled out, and there was nothing I could do. No amount of money, no amount of pleading, nothing could save them." He met Sherry's eyes. "Maybe God put me on that road tonight because I couldn't save them, but I could save you. Maybe this is my second chance to do right." Sherry reached out and took his hand. This man who'd shown her more kindness in one night than she'd known in her entire marriage. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved both of our lives." "No," Donald said, looking at baby Jacob sleeping peacefully. "You saved mine too. I've been dead inside for so long. But tonight, helping you, seeing this little one come into the world, I feel alive again." He stood, preparing to leave and let her rest. But Sherry's next words stopped him. "Where will we go when they discharge us? I have nothing. No home, no money, nowhere to take my son." Donald smiled, the first real smile he'd felt in years. "You'll come home with me," he said simply. "Both of you. I have more than enough space, more than enough resources. You and Jacob will want for nothing, I promise you that." "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." Donald's voice was gentle but firm. "Sherry, you've been through something no one should ever endure. Let me help you rebuild. No strings attached, no obligations. Just help from someone who knows what it's like to lose everything." Sherry looked at her son, at this tiny life depending on her, and knew she had no other options. But more than that, she felt in her soul that this man was safe, was good, was sent by God himself. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." Donald nodded and finally headed toward the door to let her rest. But he paused, turning back one more time. "Sherry, that mansion where they threw you out, who owns it?" "The Sipes family. Kevin Sipes and his mother Kelly." Donald's eyes hardened, and Sherry saw steel beneath the kindness. "They're going to regret what they did to you. I promise you that." And Donald Cooper was a man who kept his promises. A passing billionaire, sitting in his car, saw the shocking scene and rushed toward her. Chapter 6. The Billionaire's Grace. The Cooper estate was nothing like the Sipes mansion. Where the Sipes home had been cold marble and hard edges, sharp with judgment and cruelty, Donald's home was warm wood and soft light, filled with the kind of comfort that came from someone who understood what it meant to need shelter from the storms of life. When Donald brought Sherry and baby Jacob home from the hospital, he gave them the entire west wing, a suite of rooms with a bedroom, sitting area, private bathroom, and nursery that had been prepared while they were still in the hospital. "I had my staff set everything up," Donald explained as Sherry stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. "If there's anything you need, anything at all, just tell me." The nursery was perfect, a crib with soft bedding, a rocking chair by the window, shelves stocked with diapers, clothes, everything a newborn could possibly need. On the dresser sat a silver frame with the quote, "Every child is a gift from God." Sherry burst into tears. "Hey, what's wrong?" Donald was immediately concerned. "If you don't like the setup, we can change it. No one's ever been this kind to me," Sherry sobbed, holding Jacob close. "Not once in my entire life has anyone treated me like I mattered, like I deserved good things." Donald felt his heart break for this woman who'd been so beaten down by cruelty that simple kindness made her cry. "You do matter, Sherry. You and Jacob both matter. And from now on, you're going to be treated the way you should have been treated all along, with respect, with care, with dignity." He gave her space to settle in. But over the coming days, Donald found himself drawn to the West Wing more and more often. He'd check in during breakfast, making sure Sherry had eaten, that Jacob was feeding well, that she had everything she needed. He'd visit in the afternoons, often finding Sherry in the rocking chair with Jacob, singing softly to her son. At night, when Jacob cried, as newborns do, Donald would sometimes hear Sherry pacing the halls, trying not to disturb anyone. He'd appear with warm milk or herbal tea, sitting with her while she fed the baby, keeping her company in the lonely hours before dawn. "You don't have to do this," Sherry said one night, exhausted and grateful. "You've already done so much." "I want to," Donald said simply. "Besides, it's been a long time since this house felt like a home instead of a mausoleum. You and Jacob are bringing life back to it." Slowly, carefully, Sherry began to heal. The physical wounds from childbirth mended. The malnutrition began to reverse, as Donald's cook prepared nourishing meals and brought them to her 3 times a day. The exhaustion eased as she was able to actually sleep, knowing she was safe, knowing her son was safe. But the emotional wounds ran deeper. Sherry would wake in the night in a panic, convinced Kelly Sipes was standing over Jacob's crib, ready to steal him away. She'd rush to the nursery, heart pounding, only to find her son sleeping peacefully, safe and sound. Donald found her like that one night, standing over the crib and shaking. "He's okay," Donald said gently. "He's safe, Sherry. They could come for him," she whispered. "Kelly wanted a grandson. Now that she knows Jacob is a boy, she'll come for him. Over my dead body," Donald said, and the steel in his voice was absolute. "No one is taking Jacob from you. Not Kelly Sipes, not Kevin, not anyone. I will protect you both, Sherry. That's a promise." As the days turned into weeks, Donald learned more about what Sherry had endured. Not all at once. The story came out in pieces, late at night, when Jacob was sleeping and the house was quiet, when Sherry felt safe enough to remember. The servitude, the insults, the isolation, Kevin's weakness and Kelly's cruelty. The devastating moment when Dr. Smith had lied about Jacob's paternity and Kevin had believed it without question. "He never even asked for proof," Sherry said, tears sliding down her cheeks. "His own child, and he just believed I'd betrayed him because his mother said so." Donald felt rage building every time Sherry shared another piece of her story. But he kept it controlled, channeled it into determination. The Sipes family would answer for what they'd done. But first, he needed to make sure Sherry was strong enough to face them. "Have you thought about what you want to do?" Donald asked one afternoon, watching Sherry cradle Jacob. "Legally, you're still married to Kevin, and they could potentially claim rights to Jacob." Fear flashed across Sherry's face. "No, they can't have him. They threw us away. They don't get to come back now and pretend they want him." "I agree completely. But we need to be proactive." Donald pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call my attorney. We're going to file for divorce, full custody, and a restraining order. And we're going to make sure the truth about what they did comes out." "They'll fight it," Sherry said. "Kelly has money, connections, lawyers." "So do I," Donald said quietly. "And I promise you, Sherry, my resources are far greater than the Sipes family's. More importantly, the truth is on our side." Over the following weeks, Donald's legal team went to work. They gathered evidence, hospital records showing Sherry's malnourishment and injuries, witness statements from hospital staff who'd seen her condition when she arrived, weather reports proving the severity of the storm the night she was thrown out. Donald had also hired private investigators who discovered something crucial. Dr. Graham Smith had deposited a large sum of money into his account the day before he'd lied about Jacob's paternity, a sum that traced back to Kelly Sipes. "We've got them," Donald's lawyer said, laying out the evidence. "Fraud, perjury, conspiracy, and the fact that they threw a pregnant woman out in a storm could be considered attempted murder." "I don't want revenge," Sherry said quietly. "I just want to be free. I want Jacob to be safe." "You'll have both," Donald promised. and they'll face justice for what they did. But news had a way of spreading, especially in their social circles. And within weeks, word had reached the Sipes mansion. Sherry Elliott had given birth to a healthy baby boy. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Kelly Sipes, who'd been content to let Sherry disappear into obscurity with a worthless daughter, suddenly wanted her grandson, a male heir to carry on the Sipes name, exactly what she'd planned for all along. Kevin, weak as ever, was easily manipulated into believing that he'd been robbed of his son, that Donald Cooper had kidnapped his wife and stolen his child. They hired lawyers. They filed motions. They demanded custody, claiming Sherry was an unfit mother who'd abandoned her husband, that Donald had coerced her, that the baby belonged with the Sipes family. When the legal papers arrived at the Cooper estate, Sherry had a full panic attack. She held Jacob and sobbed, certain she was going to lose her son, certain the courts would side with the wealthy, established Sipes family over a poor, abandoned wife. But Donald held her, let her cry, and then lifted her chin so she had to look at him. Listen to me. They're not going to win. I won't let them. Every lie they've told, every cruelty they've inflicted, it's all going to come out in court. The truth will win, Sherry. They believe that. How can you be so sure? Donald thought about his wife, about the son he'd lost, about the 5 years he'd spent drowning in grief and regret. Because I've seen what happens when good people do nothing. I've seen what happens when evil goes unchallenged. His voice was fierce, determined. But I also believe in justice, in truth, in protecting the innocent. And you and Jacob are innocent. What they did to you was evil. And I'm not going to let evil win. Not this time. Sherry looked at this man who'd saved her life, who'd given her a home, who'd protected her and her son without asking for anything in return. And she saw something in his eyes that she'd never seen in Kevin's. Strength born, not of cruelty, but of conviction. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked. "Really?" Donald was quiet for a moment, then spoke with raw honesty. "Because when I lost my wife and son, I felt like I'd failed them, like my money and my power meant nothing if I couldn't save the people I loved most. I've been living in that failure for 5 years, punishing myself, shutting out the world." He looked at Jacob sleeping in Sherry's arms. "But that night I found you in the storm. I realized God was giving me another chance. Not to replace what I lost. Nothing could ever replace them. But to do right by someone who needed help. To use my resources to protect instead of to grieve. You and Jacob gave me purpose again, Sherry. Let me return the favor." Sherry felt something shift in her chest. Something warm and terrifying and hopeful all at once. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me. Just heal, get strong. And when we face the Sipes family in court, you stand tall and tell the truth. That's all I ask." "And after?" Sherry asked. "After the court case, after the divorce, what happens then?" Donald met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not pity, not obligation, but something deeper, something real. "Then you build a life," he said simply. "For you and Jacob, whatever that looks like, wherever it leads. I'll help however I can." "And you?" Sherry's heart was pounding. "What will you do?" Donald smiled, and it was the first time Sherry had seen him look truly at peace. "I'll keep doing what I'm doing now, taking care of the people who matter to me." "And Sherry?" He reached out and gently touched Jacob's tiny hand. "You and Jacob matter to me. More than I expected, more than I can quite explain. But you do." Before Sherry could respond, before she could examine the feelings blooming in her own chest, Donald's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his expression darkened. "When?" A pause. "I see. Thank you." He hung up and looked at Sherry with grim determination. "The Sipes family has gone to the police. They're filing charges, claiming I kidnapped you and Jacob, that I'm holding you against your will." Sherry felt the blood drain from her face. "That's insane." "It's also calculated. They're trying to paint themselves as the victims, trying to get public sympathy before this goes to court." Donald's jaw was tight. They've even contacted the media. This is about to become very public, very messy. I'm so sorry, Sherry said, tears falling. This is all my fault. I've brought nothing but trouble. Stop. Donald's voice was firm but kind. This is not your fault. This is them showing their true colors. And you know what? I welcome it. Let them go to the police. Let them talk to the media. Because everything they say, every lie they tell, is going to be exposed in court. They're digging their own graves. Are you sure? Sherry's voice was small, frightened. Donald knelt in front of her, his eyes blazing with determination. I've never been more sure of anything. We're going to face them, Sherry. And we're going to win. Together. As Donald made calls to his lawyers, as he prepared for the storm of accusations and lies that was about to descend, Sherry held her son and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope and something else. Something she was afraid to name but couldn't quite deny. The beginning of trust. The first fragile shoots of affection for the man who'd saved her life and asked for nothing in return. The battle was coming, but for the first time since she'd married Kevin Sipes, Sherry felt like she had someone truly fighting on her side. News spread quickly that she had given birth to a son, not a girl. Chapter 7. Sanctuary. The news vans arrived at the Cooper estate gates on a grey morning when Jacob was just weeks old. Sherry was in the nursery, feeding her son, when she heard the commotion outside, shouting reporters, camera crews, the aggressive churn of a media circus descending. Donald appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Don't go near the windows," he said. "And don't worry, security won't let them pass the gates." But even from inside, Sherry could hear the questions being shouted. "Mr. Cooper, did you kidnap Sherry Elliott? Is it true you're holding a newborn baby against his father's wishes? Mr. Cooper, what's your relationship with Mrs. Sipes?" Sherry felt sick. "They're calling me Mrs. Sipes, like I still belong to him." "You don't belong to anyone except yourself," Donald said firmly. "And soon, the whole world will know the truth." The truth, as it turned out, was about to become very public. Kelly and Kevin Sipes had orchestrated a masterful public relations campaign. They'd gone on local news, eyes red from manufactured tears, describing how their troubled daughter-in-law had fallen under the influence of a wealthy man who'd taken advantage of her vulnerable state. "We just want our grandson back," Kelly said to the cameras, dabbing at dry eyes. "We want our family reunited. My son has been devastated by this separation." Kevin, standing beside his mother like an obedient shadow, nodded along. "I love my wife and my son. I just want them to come home." It was a performance worthy of an award, except every word was a lie. Donald's lawyers had advised against engaging with the media directly, but Donald knew that silence would be interpreted as guilt. So he called a press conference of his own. Sherry watched from the house as Donald stood on the estate's front steps, cameras rolling, reporters pressing forward with microphones and questions. "I'm going to make a brief statement, and I won't be taking questions at this time," Donald said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being heard. 3 weeks ago, I found Sherry Elliott lying in the road during a severe thunderstorm. She was 9 months pregnant in active labor and had been thrown out of her home by her husband and mother-in-law. A murmur went through the crowd of reporters. "I brought her to the hospital, where she safely delivered a healthy baby boy. Since then, Mrs. Elliott and her son have been guests in my home, recovering from their ordeal. She is here of her own free will. She is not being held against her will. She is simply a woman who needed help, and I provided it." "What about the kidnapping charges?" a reporter shouted. "There was no kidnapping. Mrs. Elliott will testify to that in court, as will medical staff who treated her injuries from being thrown out of her home during a storm." Donald's eyes were hard. "The real question isn't why I helped her. The real question is why a pregnant woman was thrown into a storm in the first place. Another reporter called out, "Mr. Sipes claims the baby isn't his. Is that why his wife left?" Mr. Sipes was told a lie by a corrupt doctor who was paid to destroy his marriage. Medical records will prove that Jacob is indeed his biological son, but Mr. Sipes chose to believe that lie and used it as an excuse to abuse his pregnant wife. Donald's voice was sharp, cutting. "This isn't a story about kidnapping. This is a story about domestic abuse, fraud, and the attempted murder of a pregnant woman and her unborn child." The press conference exploded with questions, but Donald simply turned and walked back into his home, leaving the reporters to process what he'd just revealed. Inside, Sherry was crying. "He defended me," she said to Donald's housekeeper, Margaret, who'd been keeping her company. "He stood up there and told the truth. Mr. Cooper is a good man," Margaret said kindly. "Best I've ever worked for. When he believes in something, he doesn't back down." Donald found Sherry in the sitting room, holding Jacob and watching the press conference replay on the television. "You shouldn't watch that," he said gently. "It'll just upset you. You called what they did attempted murder." Sherry looked up at him with wide eyes. "Do you really believe that? What else would you call throwing a pregnant woman out in a storm?" Donald's voice was tight with controlled anger. "They didn't care if you lived or died, Sherry. They just wanted you gone." Sherry knew he was right, but hearing it said so starkly made the horror of it fresh again. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we prepare for court. My lawyers have compiled all the evidence. We've got hospital records, weather reports, witness statements from the medical staff who treated you. We've also found the bank records showing Kelly's payment to Dr. Smith. Will that be enough?" Donald sat beside her, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "It'll be enough. But Sherry, I need to prepare you. It's going to be ugly. They're going to try to destroy your character, make you look like the villain. Can you handle that?" Sherry thought about everything she'd already survived, the abuse, the humiliation, the terror of being thrown out in the storm. She'd survived all of that. She could survive a courtroom. "I can handle it," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "For Jacob, I can handle anything." "Good," Donald smiled, "because we're not just defending you in this case. We're going to make sure the truth about the Sipes family comes out. Every lie, every act of cruelty, everything. By the time we're done, the whole world will know what kind of people they really are." Over the following weeks, Sherry and Donald worked with his legal team to prepare her testimony. They went over every detail of her marriage, painful, humiliating details that Sherry had tried to forget. The first time Kelly called her garbage from the slums. The way Kevin had stopped defending her, stopped seeing her as his wife, until she was just another servant in his mother's house. The night she'd overheard Kelly's plan to take any male child and dispose of any female one. Dr. Smith's lie, and Kevin's immediate, unquestioning belief in it, the months of escalating abuse as her pregnancy progressed, and finally, the terrible night, the storm, the shove, the door slamming in her face, the crawl down the driveway, convinced she was going to die. Every time Sherry recounted these memories, she cried, and every time Donald was there offering tissues, offering comfort, offering the steady presence of someone who believed her, who validated her pain. "You're incredibly strong," he told her one evening after a particularly difficult preparation session. "Stronger than you know." "I don't feel strong," Sherry admitted. "I feel broken." "You're not broken. You're wounded, which is different. Wounds heal." Donald's voice was gentle. "And I'm going to make sure you have all the time and support you need to heal." Sherry looked at this man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing, and felt her heart do something she'd sworn it would never do again. It opened, not all the way, not recklessly, but enough to let in the possibility that maybe someday she could trust again, could love again, could believe in goodness again. "Donald," she said softly. "Yes? Why are you really doing all this? And don't say it's just about second chances or redemption. There's something more, isn't there? Donald was quiet for a long moment, looking at Jacob sleeping in his bassinet, then back at Sherry. When I lost my wife and son, I thought my life was over. I shut down, shut everyone out, went through the motions of living without actually being alive. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But when I found you in that storm, when I held your hand through Jacob's birth, when I saw you being a mother to this perfect little boy, something woke up in me. Something I thought was dead. What? Sherry's heart was pounding. Hope, Donald said simply. Hope that good things can still happen, that I can still make a difference, that maybe I deserve a second chance at happiness. He met her eyes. You gave me that, Sherry. You and Jacob reminded me what it feels like to care about someone, to want to protect someone, to want to build a future instead of just mourning the past. Sherry felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for anything from you except the chance to keep helping, keep being part of your life, in whatever way you're comfortable with. Donald smiled. I know you need time to heal. I know trust doesn't come easily after what you've been through. I'm not asking for more than you can give. I just want you to know you're not alone anymore. You have someone in your corner, always. Before Sherry could respond, before she could examine the warm, terrifying feelings blooming in her chest, Donald's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his expression hardened. I see. Thank you for the warning. He hung up and looked at Sherry with steel in his eyes. They're coming? Tomorrow. Kelly and Kevin are coming here with their lawyers and police, demanding to see Jacob. Terror flooded through Sherry. They can't! They can't take him. They won't, Donald said firmly. The police can't force you to hand over your child without a court order, which they don't have. But they can demand to see that you're here willingly, that Jacob is safe. I don't want to see them, Sherry said, her whole body shaking. I don't want them anywhere near my son. You won't have to talk to them. My lawyers will handle everything. But Sherry, Donald knelt in front of her, taking her hands. This is actually good news. They're getting desperate, making rash moves. Desperate people make mistakes. And when they do, we'll be ready. That night, Sherry barely slept. She kept Jacob in her room, lying awake and listening for any sound that might signal Kevin and Kelly forcing their way in. But Donald's security was excellent, and the night passed without incident. Morning came bright and cold. Sherry watched from an upstairs window as several cars pulled up to the estate gates. She recognized Kelly's Mercedes, Kevin sitting in the passenger seat. Behind them, police cars. News vans. It was a spectacle, carefully orchestrated for maximum public impact. Donald's lawyers met them at the gate, documents in hand. Sherry couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw Kelly gesturing angrily, saw Kevin looking uncertain. The police spoke with Donald's lawyers, examined the paperwork, and then, to Kelly's visible fury, they left. No forced entry, no confrontation, just a simple verification that Sherry was at the estate of her own free will and that Jacob was safe and healthy. Kelly stood at the gate, screaming threats that Sherry couldn't quite hear. Kevin tried to calm his mother, but she shook him off, her face twisted with rage. Finally, they left, but the news vans remained. The cameras focused on the estate. Donald came upstairs to find Sherry, who'd been watching the whole scene unfold. They couldn't get in, she said, relief making her voice shake, and they never will. Not without a court order, and they're not going to get one. The evidence against them is too strong. Donald put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture of comfort and protection. The court date is set for next month. 1 month, and this will all be over. And then? Sherry asked, looking up at him. Then you're free, Donald said. Free from Kevin, free from Kelly, free to build whatever life you want. What Sherry wanted, she was beginning to realize, was standing right beside her. But she wasn't ready to say that yet. Not when the wounds were still so fresh, not when Kevin's betrayal was still so recent. So she just nodded and held her son close, counting down the days until she could finally, truly be free. Her greedy husband and his mother filed a false case, accusing the billionaire of kidnapping his wife and stealing his baby. Chapter 8. The False Accusation. The courtroom was packed with reporters, spectators, and people who'd followed the story with rapt attention. It had become the scandal of the season, wealthy family versus wealthy benefactor, with a helpless woman and innocent child caught in the middle, except Sherry wasn't helpless anymore. She sat at the plaintiff's table beside Donald and his team of lawyers, holding her head high despite the fear churning in her stomach. Jacob was with Margaret back at the estate, safe and far from this ugly battle. Across the aisle, Kelly and Kevin Sipes sat with their own legal team, looking polished and confident. Kelly wore pearls and a designer suit, playing the part of the grieving grandmother to perfection. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled immaculately, every inch the respectable matriarch. Kevin looked appropriately wounded, the wronged husband seeking justice, though Sherry could see the uncertainty in his eyes whenever he glanced her way. It was all theatre, and Sherry knew it. But she wondered if the judge and jury could see through the performance. The judge entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. The Sipes family's lawyer stood to present their case, a tall man with silver hair and a voice that dripped with false sincerity. "Your Honor, my clients are loving parents who have been cruelly separated from their newborn son by a man with more money than morals. Donald Cooper, using his wealth and influence, has kidnapped Mrs. Sherry Sipes and her infant son, holding them against their will, while filling her head with lies about her loving husband and concerned mother-in-law." Sherry's hands clenched in her lap. Every word was a lie, but spoken with such conviction that she worried people might believe it. She felt Donald's hand cover hers under the table, a silent gesture of support. The Sipes lawyer continued, painting a picture of Kevin as a devoted husband whose wife had been led astray, of Kelly as a caring mother-in-law who only wanted what was best for her grandchild. He spoke of Donald as a predator who'd taken advantage of a vulnerable woman, using his resources to isolate her from her family. They asked this court for justice, to return the child to his rightful family, and to hold Mr. Cooper accountable for his actions. When it was Donald's lawyer's turn, the truth began to emerge. "Your Honor, we have evidence that will prove every claim made by the Sipes family is not only false, but maliciously so. This is not a case of kidnapping. This is a case of a woman escaping domestic abuse and finding refuge with someone brave enough to help her." The lawyer presented hospital records first. Sherry's condition when she arrived, malnourished and injured in active labor. The photos made several people in the courtroom gasp. Bruises on her arms, her skeletal frame despite being pregnant, the clear signs of long-term neglect and abuse. Medical testimony from the doctors and nurses who treated her came next, describing her terror and desperation, the way she'd begged them not to send her back to the Sipes mansion. Then came the weather reports from that night, showing the severity of the storm, wind speeds that had knocked down trees, rainfall totals that had flooded streets, lightning strikes that had caused power outages across the region. Visual evidence that no one would willingly be outside in such conditions unless forced. Donald's lawyer called witness after witness, building a timeline of abuse and cruelty that made several people in the courtroom gasp and one woman in the gallery start crying openly. But the nuclear bomb came when they called Dr. Graham Smith to the stand. The doctor looked terrible, thin, pale, haunted. He'd already lost his medical license in a preliminary hearing, his reputation destroyed. Now he was here to tell the truth he should have told months ago. His hands shook as he was sworn in. "Dr. Smith," Donald's lawyer began, his voice calm but sharp, "did you ever conduct paternity testing on the child Sherry Elliott was carrying?" No," Graham said quietly, his voice barely audible. "No, I did not. And yet you told Kevin Sipes that the child was not his. Why?" The courtroom went silent, every person leaning forward to hear the answer. Graham looked at Kelly Sipes, saw no mercy in her eyes, saw only cold calculation and threat. and made his choice because Kelly Sipes paid me to lie. She deposited a large sum of money into my account, enough to cover my gambling debts, in exchange for telling her son that his wife had been unfaithful and the baby wasn't his. The courtroom erupted. Reporters typed frantically. Spectators gasped and whispered. The judge banged his gavel for order, while Kelly's face remained frozen in a mask of composure that was starting to crack at the edges. Kevin's face had gone white as paper. He turned to his mother, confusion and dawning horror in his eyes. "Mother, is that true?" Kelly's mask finally cracked. "It doesn't matter now. The child is—" "It matters!" Kevin's voice rose, shaking with emotion. "You paid someone to lie? To destroy my marriage? You made me throw out my pregnant wife based on a lie. I was protecting you." Kelly hissed, her composure shattering completely. "That woman was beneath you. She would have ruined everything. She was trash, Kevin, and I wasn't going to let her pollute our family line." The judge banged his gavel again. "Order! Mrs. Sipes, you will have your opportunity to speak when called to testify." Donald's lawyer produced bank records showing the transfer from Kelly to Graham, phone records showing multiple calls between them before the fake diagnosis, a paper trail of corruption that was impossible to deny. Then came the security footage, grainy but damning. The Sipes mansion's own cameras had captured the moment Kelly shoved Sherry out the door and into the storm. The audio was muffled, but Sherry's pleas could be heard, along with Kelly's cold dismissal. Several people in the courtroom were crying now, seeing the pregnant woman thrown into the storm, watching her fall on the steps, hearing her desperate cries for help. Kevin Sipes looked like he might be sick. When it was Sherry's turn to testify, she walked to the stand with trembling legs but a steady voice. Donald's lawyer led her through her story, how she'd met Kevin, the hope she'd had for their marriage, the reality of life under Kelly's control. "Tell the court about the night you were forced to leave," the lawyer said gently. Sherry took a breath and spoke, her voice clear despite the tears on her face. "I was in labor. I went to Kevin and told him I needed to get to a hospital. But his mother said to get out. She said my baby was a bastard and not welcome in their home." Sherry's hands were shaking. Kevin didn't stop her. "He didn't protect me or our baby. His mother pushed me out the door and I fell on the steps. Then they locked the door and turned off all the lights." "What did you do then?" "I tried to crawl to the street to get help. I thought I was going to die. I thought my baby was going to die." Sherry looked directly at Kevin, who couldn't meet her eyes. "I prayed for someone to help us, and God sent Donald Cooper." The Sipes lawyer tried to paint Sherry as an opportunist, someone who'd seduced a wealthy man to secure her future. But every attack fell flat against the mountain of evidence showing her victimhood. When Kelly took the stand, she tried to maintain her composure, tried to claim everything had been a misunderstanding. But when confronted with the security footage, with Dr. Smith's testimony, with the bank records, her lies crumbled. "I did what I had to do to protect my family," she finally shouted, her careful facade shattering. "That woman was not good enough for the Sipes name. She was trash, and I treated her accordingly." The judge's expression grew thunderous. "Mrs. Sipes, you are admitting to fraud, conspiracy, and endangerment of a pregnant woman." Kelly seemed to realize her mistake, but it was too late. That's not what I meant." "I think it's exactly what you meant." The judge turned to Kevin. "Mr. Sipes, you have been remarkably quiet during these proceedings. Do you have anything to say?" Kevin stood on shaking legs, his face a mixture of shame and belated understanding. His voice cracked. "I was wrong. I should have protected my wife. I should have questioned the doctor's claims. I should have stood up to my mother." He looked at Sherry, tears streaming down his face. "I failed you in every way a husband can fail his wife. I failed our son before he was even born." It was the first honest thing Kevin had said in their entire marriage, but it was far too late. The judge called a brief recess to review the evidence. When court reconvened, his decision was swift and final. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented, and I am appalled by what I've seen. This court finds that Sherry Elliott was subjected to systematic abuse, fraud, and endangerment by the Sipes family. The claim of kidnapping is not only false, but malicious, designed to cover up their own crimes. Kelly started to object, but the judge silenced her with a look. Furthermore, I'm granting Mrs. Elliott a divorce from Kevin Sipes, effective immediately. She is awarded full custody of her son Jacob, with no visitation rights for Mr. Sipes, given his participation in the abuse and his failure to protect his child. Your Honor, please, Kevin cried out. At least let me see my son. Hold him once. You lost that right when you threw a pregnant woman into a storm, the judge said coldly. As for Kelly Sipes and Dr. Graham Smith, I'm referring your cases to the District Attorney for criminal prosecution. The charges will include fraud, conspiracy, perjury, and attempted murder. I'm recommending the maximum prison sentence. Kelly's scream of outrage echoed through the courtroom. This is ridiculous. I'll appeal. You can try, the judge said. But I doubt any appeals court will look kindly on someone who paid a doctor to destroy a marriage and then threw a pregnant woman out in a storm. Police officers moved to escort Kelly and Graham from the courtroom. Kelly fought them every step, screaming about injustice and persecution. Kevin didn't fight. He simply sat, broken and defeated, watching his mother being led away in handcuffs. But before the police could remove them, Kevin stood and tried to rush toward where Sherry stood with Donald. Please, he shouted. Please just let me see Jacob. Just once, he's my son. Two officers grabbed him, holding him back, but Kevin kept reaching toward Sherry, desperate and pathetic. You have no rights to that child, one officer said firmly. You gave those up when you threw a pregnant woman into a storm. I didn't know. Kevin was sobbing now. I didn't know the truth. Mother lied to me, manipulated me. You chose to believe those lies, Sherry said, finding her voice. She stepped forward, looking at the man who'd once been her husband. You chose your mother over me, over our child, every single time. You don't get to claim ignorance now, Kevin. You knew I was telling the truth. You just didn't care. Kevin's face crumpled. I'm sorry. God, Sherry, I'm so sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't change what you did. Sorry doesn't erase the scars. Sherry's voice was steady, strong. Goodbye, Kevin. The officers led him away. Still crying, still begging for one chance to see his son. But that chance would never come. The judge concluded the proceedings, signed the divorce papers, and it was done. Sherry Elliott was free. In court, the truth came out. The fake report, the bribed doctor, and the years of cruelty. Chapter 9. The Truth Unveiled. The weeks following the trial were surreal for Sherry. Kelly Sipes and Dr. Graham Smith were sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Kelly for conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and a host of other charges. Graham for medical fraud and conspiracy. The judge had shown no mercy, calling their actions a level of cruelty that shocks the conscience of this court. Kevin received a lighter sentence, probation and mandatory counseling for his role in the abuse. Though he lost all rights to Jacob permanently, the judge had noted that while Kevin was manipulated by his mother, he was still an adult who'd made choices, and those choices had nearly killed his wife and child. The media coverage was intense. The story had everything: wealth, betrayal, corruption, a mother's love, and a billionaire's redemption. Sherry's face was on magazine covers, news websites, television screens. Survivor's story: how one woman escaped abuse and found hope. The truth behind the Sipes scandal. A tale of cruelty and grace. Billionaire's act of kindness saves mother and child. Sherry hated the attention, but Donald's legal team had prepared her for it. She gave one interview telling her story in her own words, and then retreated from the public eye to focus on what mattered: healing and being a mother to Jacob. Back at the Cooper estate, life settled into a peaceful routine. Jacob was thriving, growing bigger and more alert each day. Sherry spent her mornings with him, afternoons in the estate's beautiful garden, and evenings having dinner with Donald, talking about everything and nothing. They'd become friends, she realized. Real friends. Donald made her laugh with dry observations about the world. She challenged his cynicism with her determination to see good in people despite what she'd been through. They talked about books, about music, about dreams they'd given up and hopes they were beginning to nurture again. And slowly, carefully, something more than friendship was growing between them. Sherry saw it in the way Donald's eyes softened when he looked at her, in the way he always made sure her favorite tea was stocked, in the way he'd appear in the nursery late at night when Jacob was fussy, offering to hold the baby so Sherry could rest. She felt it in her own racing heart when Donald smiled at her, in the way she looked forward to their evening conversations, in the warmth that flooded through her when his hand accidentally brushed hers, but she was terrified. "I don't know how to trust again," she told Margaret one afternoon, while the housekeeper helped fold Jacob's tiny clothes. "Kevin destroyed something in me. How do I know Donald won't do the same?" Margaret, who'd worked for Donald for years and loved him like a son, smiled gently. "Mr. Cooper is nothing like Kevin Sipes, dear. He's a good man who's been broken by loss and is learning to live again, just like you." "But what if I'm just grateful? What if I'm confusing gratitude with something else?" "Are you?" Margaret asked shrewdly. "Or are you afraid to admit you're falling in love because love has hurt you before?" Sherry didn't have an answer for that. Donald, for his part, was patient. He never pushed, never demanded, never made Sherry feel pressured. He simply existed in her life as a constant, steady presence, someone she could count on, someone who'd proven time and again that he would protect her and Jacob no matter what. But one evening, as they sat in the garden watching the sunset while Jacob slept in his stroller, Sherry finally asked the question that had been haunting her. "What happens now, Donald? The trial is over. I'm divorced. Eventually I need to figure out my life, find my own place, get a job." "Why?" Donald interrupted gently. "What do you mean, why? I can't stay here forever. I need to build a life for Jacob. Who says you can't build that life here?" Donald turned to face her, his grey eyes serious. "Sherry, I know you need time. I know you need space to heal and figure out who you are outside of all the trauma. I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. I'm just asking you to consider that maybe you don't have to leave. Maybe home is right here." Sherry's heart was pounding. "Donald, let me finish." He took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I told you once that you and Jacob gave me hope again. That's still true. But it's become more than hope. You've become essential to me, Sherry. I wake up thinking about making you smile. I go through my day looking forward to our evening talks. I watch you with Jacob, and I think about what kind of father I could be to him if you'd let me." Tears were streaming down Sherry's face now. "I'm scared. I know. So am I." Donald's voice was raw with honesty. "I'm terrified of loving again and losing again. But I'm more terrified of letting you walk out of my life without telling you how I feel." "And how do you feel?" Sherry whispered. "I love you," Donald said simply. "I love your strength, your kindness, your fierce protection of your son. I love the way you hum while you fold laundry, and the way you always check on me when I've been working too long. I love that you see me as a person, not as a wallet or a means to an end. I love you, Sherry Elliott. And I love Jacob like he's my own son." Sherry was sobbing now, overwhelmed by emotion. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm ready." "Then don't decide today. Take all the time you need." Donald wiped away her tears with gentle fingers. "I'm not going anywhere. Whether you decide you can love me back or whether you decide we're better as friends, I'll still be here. You and Jacob will always have a home with me, always have my protection, always have my support. That's not conditional on you loving me back." "You're too good to be true," Sherry said, laughing through her tears. "Meant like you don't exist in real life. I'm not perfect, Sherry. I'm just a man who knows what it's like to lose everything and who's been given a second chance at happiness. I'm not going to waste it." Donald stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "Now come on, Jacob's starting to wake up, and I believe it's my turn to give him his bottle." As Donald lifted Jacob from the stroller, Cooing at the baby with such tenderness, Sherry felt something inside her finally truly break free. The walls around her heart, built brick by brick during her marriage to Kevin, were crumbling. And behind those walls was the truth she'd been too afraid to admit. She was falling in love with Donald Cooper. Maybe she'd been falling since that night in the storm when he'd promised to save her and kept that promise. Maybe it had happened gradually, in all the small kindnesses and the steady presence. Maybe it had been inevitable from the moment she'd looked into his eyes and seen a soul as wounded and hopeful as her own. It didn't matter when it had started. What mattered was that it was real. And for the first time since her wedding to Kevin Sipes, Sherry allowed herself to hope that love might not always end in betrayal and pain. That maybe, just maybe, it could be something beautiful. The next morning, Sherry woke early and found Donald in the garden, just as the sun was rising. He looked surprised to see her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "I've been thinking," Sherry said, her heart racing. "About what you said yesterday." Donald went very still. And I realized something." Sherry stepped closer to him. "I've been so afraid of being hurt again that I almost missed something amazing happening right in front of me." "Sherry." "I love you too," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it. But I'm not going to let fear stop me from living anymore. Kevin and Kelly tried to destroy me, but I survived. And now I'm going to do more than survive. I'm going to be happy. With you, if you'll have me." Donald's face transformed, joy lighting up his features in a way that made him look years younger. "If I'll have you? Sherry, I've been yours since the moment I found you in that storm." He pulled her into his arms, and Sherry felt for the first time in her entire life completely safe, completely cherished, completely home. They stood there as the sun rose, two broken people who'd found healing in each other, ready to build a future together. But first, there was one more piece of business to attend to. Later that day, Donald made a phone call to his lawyers. "I want to formally adopt Jacob," he said while Sherry listened, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I want to be his father in every legal sense. Can we make that happen?" The lawyer assured him they could. And that's how Jacob Elliott became Jacob Elliott Cooper, with a father who would die to protect him and a mother who'd survived hell to give him life. The truth was out. Justice had been served. And from the ashes of cruelty and betrayal, love had bloomed. But there was still one more conversation that needed to happen. One more moment of closure that would finally, completely set Sherry free. The judge was furious, sentencing the husband and his mother to 10 years in prison. Chapter 10. A New Beginning. The police station was cold and institutional, all harsh lighting and cinder-block walls. Sherry sat in a private room, Jacob sleeping peacefully in her arms, while Donald stood behind her chair like a guardian. Kevin Sipes was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked terrible, thin, hollow-eyed, broken in ways that went beyond physical. When he saw Sherry and the baby, he stopped walking, and the officer had to gently push him forward. "Sit down, Mr. Sipes," the officer said, not unkindly. Kevin sat across from Sherry, his eyes fixed on Jacob, with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. But she'd asked for this meeting, needed it for closure. "Thank you for seeing me," Kevin said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't think you would." "I almost didn't," Sherry said honestly. "But I needed to say some things to you, and I needed you to hear them." Kevin nodded, still staring at the baby. Can I at least see his face?" Sherry hesitated, then shifted Jacob so Kevin could see him properly. The baby was awake now, his dark eyes curious and bright. Kevin let out a sob. "He's beautiful." "He looks like you." "He looks like himself," Sherry corrected. "He's his own person, Kevin, not a Sipes heir, not a possession to be claimed. Just a little boy who deserves to grow up loved and safe." "I know. God, Sherry, I know." Kevin's tears fell freely now. "I've had a lot of time to think in here. About what I did, what I didn't do, how I failed both of you. I can't, there aren't words for how sorry I am. Sorry doesn't fix this, Sherry said, her voice steady despite the emotion swirling in her chest. Sorry doesn't erase what you put me through. But I didn't come here for your apology, Kevin. I came here to tell you that I forgive you. Kevin's head snapped up, shock clear on his face. What? I forgive you, Sherry repeated. Not because you deserve it. Not because what you did was okay. But because I refuse to carry hate and bitterness for the rest of my life. I refuse to let you and Kelly poison my future the way you poisoned my past. I don't understand, Kevin whispered. After everything. Forgiveness isn't for you, Kevin, it's for me. It's me choosing to let go of the pain, to move forward, to build something good with my life, instead of dwelling on the bad. Sherry looked at Donald, who was watching her with pride and love. I have a chance at real happiness now, real love. A real family for Jacob, and I'm not going to waste that chance by holding on to anger. Kevin followed her gaze to Donald, and understanding dawned in his eyes. You two are none of your concern, Sherry said firmly. My life is my own now, and I'm choosing to spend it with someone who values me, who respects me, who would never let me be hurt the way you hurt me. He's a better man than I ever was, Kevin said quietly, looking at Donald. Thank you for saving them, for being what I should have been. Donald's expression was hard. I didn't do it for your gratitude. I did it because it was right. Kevin nodded, accepting that. He looked back at Jacob, drinking in the sight of his son. Will you tell him about me? When he's older, I'll tell him the truth, Sherry said. That his biological father made mistakes, that he wasn't strong enough to stand up for what was right. But I'll also tell him that you're getting help now, that you're trying to become better. And I'll tell him that he has a father who chose to love him, who's been there from the beginning, who will always put him first. She looked at Donald as she said this, and the love in his eyes made her heart soar. Can I touch him? Kevin asked, his voice breaking. Just once, please? Sherry looked at the officer, who nodded permission as long as Kevin's hands stayed cuffed. She leaned forward, bringing Jacob close enough for Kevin to reach him. Kevin extended his cuffed hands, touching Jacob's tiny hand with one finger. The baby grabbed his finger, the way babies do, and Kevin broke down completely. I'm so sorry, he sobbed. I'm so sorry for everything. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But please, know that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be better, trying to be someone you could be proud of. Don't do it for me, Sherry said, pulling Jacob back. Do it for yourself. Become the man you should have been. And maybe someday, when Jacob is grown and wants to know you, you'll be someone worth knowing. Kevin nodded, unable to speak through his tears. The officer stepped forward. Time's up, Mr. Sipes. As Kevin was led away, he turned back one more time. I love you, Sherry. I'm sorry I never showed it the right way. I know, Sherry said softly. Goodbye, Kevin. The door closed behind him, and Sherry let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Donald knelt beside her chair, his hand on her shoulder. Are you okay? I'm free, Sherry said and smiled through her tears. I'm finally truly free. They left the police station and stepped out into bright sunshine. In the parking lot, away from prying eyes, Donald turned to Sherry with something serious in his expression. There's something I want to ask you, he said. What? Donald knelt down right there in the parking lot and pulled out a small velvet box. Sherry's heart stopped. I know this might seem fast. I know you've been through hell. But I also know that life is short and love is precious, and I don't want to waste another moment. Donald opened the box, revealing a simple, beautiful ring. Sherry Elliott, you deserve everything good this world has to offer. You deserve love, respect, peace, and joy. Let me be the one who gives you those things. Let me be the father Jacob needs. Let me be your partner, your friend, your love for the rest of our lives. Will you marry me? Sherry looked at this extraordinary man who'd saved her life and captured her heart, at the ring that represented hope and new beginnings, and felt pure joy flooding through her. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at once. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Donald slipped the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Jacob, wedged between them, made a small sound of protest, and they both laughed, pulling back to look at their son. "We're going to be a family," Sherry whispered. "A real family? We already are," Donald said, wrapping his arms around both of them. "We have been since that storm brought us together." Sometime later, they stood in the garden of the Cooper estate, now their home, their sanctuary, their place of healing and love. Sherry wore white again, but this time it was her choice. This time, the man waiting for her at the end of the aisle looked at her like she hung the moon. This time the vows they spoke were real, chosen, meant with every fiber of their beings. Jacob, now a toddler, was the ring-bearer, wobbling down the aisle with determination, while the assembled guests laughed with delight. And as Donald and Sherry were pronounced husband and wife, as they kissed while their family and friends cheered, Sherry thought about how far she'd come, from the mansion where love never existed to the home where love was the foundation of everything, from the storm that had nearly killed her to the sunshine that promised endless tomorrows, from broken and discarded to cherished and whole. "I love you," Donald whispered against her lips. "I love you too," Sherry whispered back. "Forever." From the storm that nearly destroyed her came the man who would spend his life making sure she never felt rain without shelter, never faced darkness without light, and never doubted she was loved, completely, deeply, forever.